What's going on, everyone? This is the year in wrestling 1988 part 2 video. This is part 2. I will be talking about the Clash of the Champions 1 from March 88. Also, I will talk about Clash of the Champions 2 from June 88. WrestleMania 4 I will cover. Great American Bash 88 I will cover. And the last event I will talk about happened on July 31st. It was called WrestleFest 88. It was a big event. It wasn't a pay-per-view. It was recorded for Coliseum home video, and it was a WWF video release. It was called WrestleFest 88. It's not even on the network. It's a pretty damn good show. Every top WWF superstars on it. All 3 major championships are defended. So I will talk about WrestleFest 88, and then this show Part 2 will end. Part 3, I will talk about SummerSlam 88. Some other, I believe Starrcade 88. I'll talk about some Saturday night's main events. Clash of the Champions, SummerSlam 88, in Part 3. I'm wrong. Part 4 I'll talk about Starrcade and Survivor Series. Part 3 of the year in wrestling 1988, I will talk about Jake the Snake, Rick Rude feud. The Pro Wrestling Illustrated winners in categories like Wrestler of the Year, Rookie of the Year, Manager of the Year, Match of the Year, Wrestler, Superstar of the Year. All those awards that Pro Wrestling Illustrated gives out, I will talk about all the winners for 1988. I will also talk about the Andre the Giant, Hacksaw Jim Duggan, the short feud they had in the summer, towards the end of the summer of 88, and Clash of the Champions 3 and Saturday night's main events. But that is part 3. This video is part 2. I don't know if anybody's watching this. If you are, thank you very much. As you can see by the background, it looks like a basement, folks, and it is a basement. I'm in my basement right now doing this video because I have a lot of relatives that just came over they just came over this morning, and they're all over my house yelling and screaming, and just tiny freaking kids running around screaming, and my relatives are just loud as hell, and they're talking to each other loud and whatever. We're having a barbecue later. That's another story, and I'm not going to discuss my freaking family life on these videos. Anyways, I'm in my basement because this is the only quiet place right now where I can do a video in peace and quiet. So first, I'm going to talk about some of the attendance, some of the crowds that attended the pay-per-views that I talked about in part 1 at the Buckhouse Stampede that was in Nassau Coliseum. You get to the right page. Buckhouse Stampede was in the Nassau Coliseum, Uniondale, New York. Crowd was 6,000 people. That's not very good at all for a pay-per-view that the NWA ran. Buckhouse Stampede, 6,000 attended, and the arena was like at least 20,000 could fit in the Nassau Coliseum. Buckhouse Stampede did not draw a great crowd because the card was not very good, and the show was decent and it was good in some parts. 6,000 is not very good for a pay-per-view, but it was the NWA going to the East Coast, going up north to the New York area, and the NWA didn't do that good in the East Coast. They didn't do that good. They didn't draw very well in very big crowds at all. So it's not really their fault. Only 6,000 showed up, and there were probably 14,000 seats that were empty. Up next, WrestleMania 4 at the Trump Plaza Hotel and Casino, Atlantic City, New Jersey. 14,000 showed up, paid. It was sold out. Pretty big crowd at the Trump Plaza. It was a sellout. And I didn't talk about Great American Bash yet. I will get to it, and I will talk about the show. But Great American Bash in the Baltimore Arena in Baltimore drew 14,000 people. That's close to a sellout. If it is not a sellout, 14,000 is a decent, good crowd. Okay, I'm going to get on to talking about Clash of the Champions #1 that happened on the same freaking day. The Clash of the Champions went up against WrestleMania 4, people. Very bold move by the NWA, and Jim Crockett and the NWA wanted to compete with WrestleMania 4, and they went head to head. Clash of the Champions was on TBS, and this was the first Clash of the Champions up against WrestleMania 4 on pay-per-view. March 27th, 88 was Clash of the Champions and WrestleMania. First match of Clash of the Champions was Mike Rotundo. He was IRS in the WWF when he went there in 91. And Mike Rotundo is also Bo Dallas's father and Bray Wyatt's father. A little bit of history for you all if you didn't know that. Mike Rotundo defeated Jimmy Garvin in a College Rules match. College style wrestling, I guess. That's what it was. It says College Rules match. Mike Rotundo beat Jimmy Garvin in a College Rules match. I don't remember it. It wasn't memorable, and I'm sure it wasn't very long. On to the next match. Road Warriors and Dusty Rhodes in 6-man tag team action defeated Ivan Koloff and the Powers of Pain in a barbed wire match. But it was not a barbed wire match. Yeah, they wrapped barbed wire around the 3 ropes. Excuse me there. They wrapped the barbed wire around the 3 ropes, and it wasn't a real barbed wire match. They didn't take the ropes down, and I'm sure they didn't want to take the ropes down. Nobody back then wanted to be involved in a barbed wire match. And before 88 and years later, I never saw a barbed wire match until ECW put a barbed wire match on. I believe ECW did the first barbed wire match in 94. But that's the future. I'll talk about 1994 in future videos. Anyways, I saw the first real vicious, violent, bloody, extreme, insane first ever barbed wire match I saw from ECW when I purchased a ECW home video, and it was Raven versus the Sandman. It was in '96 of October, and that was the first barbed wire match I saw. And years later, I saw all the barbed wire matches that ECW put on through downloading old ECW videos, downloading and purchasing old videos and DVDs. I've seen every barbed wire match ECW's ever put on. Anyways, that's not important. What is important is they did have barbed wire wrapped around the 3 ring ropes on all 4 sides of the ring, and just about every guy juiced in this match. Dusty got busted open. I believe Ivan Koloff, or one of the Powers of Pain, pushed Dusty's head, raked his forehead, which was already cut up and was already a mess, and it was all scar tissue. Still to this day, Dusty Rhodes has all scar tissue all over his forehead from cutting himself in matches. Dusty bled. I think the Warlord bled. Barbarian might have bled. I'm not sure if the Road Warriors were busted open. Road Warrior Animal worked the match with a giant mask on his face. He looked like he was a hockey goalie. Back in the 80s, the hockey goalies used to wear these giant masks over their face, looking like freaking Jason from Friday the 13th. Well, Animal came in this 6-man tag team barbed wire match. He came in it looking like Jason from Friday the 13th. I guess he was selling an eye injury. He had his eye bandaged up, so he was selling an injury that I guess the Powers of Pain injured his eye. So he was just selling the injury by wearing a giant hockey mask. Looked ridiculous, but he was just selling being injured. So they defeated Ivan Koloff and the Powers of Pain. Up next was the Midnight Express against the Fantastics. And the Midnight Express defeated the Fantastics by disqualification. I don't remember much about this match, and I'm going to go on to the next one. Tag team titles. NWA tag team titles are on the line. Lex Luger and Barry Windham defeated the Four Horsemen, the team of Arn Anderson and Tully Blanchard. Lex Luger and Barry Windham became the NWA tag team champions. They got a huge pop from the crowd, and the crowd loved it, and they became new tag champs. Main event, legendary rivalry. These two men had for years and years, from 1988 when they had their first match together one-on-one, until from the first Clash of the Champions, Sting and Flair, until the last WCW Monday Nitro in 2001 of March. Flair and Sting started their rivalry, and it lasted until 2001. Great rivalry. Sting and Flair always had great matches. I was always entertained by Flair versus Sting. They did a lot of the same spots in their matches. They did a lot of the same moves to each other. And I'm sure some people criticize Ric Flair. Some wrestlers say he didn't do anything new. He never came up with any new moves. He never pulled off any new moves on anybody. And Ric Flair worked the same match with every wrestler his entire career. The spot where he goes up to the turnbuckle, stands up on the turnbuckle, waits for his opponent to press slam him and throw him off. He's done that his whole career, basically. He probably started it in the 80s. That was a spot he always did. He always chopped people, but chopping people is a signature maneuver of his. And whatever. Sting, just about every Sting and Flair match, he gorilla press slammed him, threw him on his back. He press slammed him off the top, caught him on the top, press slammed him. And he also, just about every Flair Sting match, Sting went in the corner, stood on the second rope, pounded Flair, hit him 10 times, so the crowd counted to 10. They did that just about every match. But I don't care that Flair and Sting did the same spots in their matches. They were still entertaining matches. Both guys were super over. Both Flair and Sting have tremendous charisma, and they're all-time greats in pro wrestling. So Flair and Sting, first time they met, main event, Clash of the Champions 1 on TBS up against WrestleMania 4. And the first Clash of the Champions got a huge rating, very big rating, up against the pay-per-view WrestleMania 4. I believe the number was 11.7. That's 11 million people. That's over 11 million people watched the first Clash of the Champions. Flair and Sting wrestled till a 45-minute time limit draw, people. It was epic. It's a great match. It's a very memorable match. And if any fans out there watching this, or if anybody on Twitter that follows me that has not seen Flair versus Sting from the first Clash of the Champions, check it out. It's on the network, and it's well worth watching. So they went 45 minutes, and Flair in that match basically made Sting a superstar. And Sting then, right after that match, Sting was super over, and he was a top guy basically right after going 45 minutes and taking the world champion at the time, Ric Flair, taking him to the limit. And then about 2 years later, in 1990, Sting beat Flair, of course, and became the world champ. And Flair promised Sting, he promised him that if he's going to lose that title and give it to anybody and job to anybody, he wanted the guy to be Sting. So that's very cool of Flair, I think, to promise Sting that he was going to drop the NWA at the time in 1990, the WCW World Heavyweight Championship. They were still calling it the NWA title, even though it was WCW in 1990. Anyways, Flair dropping the title to Sting was great, and he promised him that back in '88, and that's pretty damn awesome. Next, I'm going to talk about the WWF's WrestleMania 4. Huge event. A lot of people criticize WrestleMania 4. A lot of fans that I've heard from actually criticize WrestleMania 4. And a lot of people, there's a lot of critics of it, say it was too boring of a show. A lot of the matches had DQs and draws, time limit draws. But I really enjoyed WrestleMania 4, and there's a lot of critics out there about WrestleMania 4, and a lot of people that did not like it. I enjoyed it, and Macho Man winning 4 matches in the tournament, having to win 4 matches, and then become WWF champion. I thought that was great, and even though Hogan was going to film the movie No Holds Barred, basically Hogan couldn't be champion anymore because he was going to film a movie I believe Vince McMahon was the executive producer of No Holds Barred, or he had some involvement in it. I know that for sure. Anyways, Hogan was going to film a movie, and a lot of people say the only reason Hogan dropped the WWF title and did the angle with Andre and Ted DiBiase a month earlier on the main event in February, people say the only reason Hogan did that and got the title off himself is because he's going to film a movie. So what? Who gives a damn? If he was going to film a movie and he did go film a movie, who gives a damn if Hogan was not champion anymore? And basically Hogan handpicked, and the WWF and Vince McMahon handpicked Macho Man Randy Savage to be the top guy and to win the title at WrestleMania, and to do it on the grandest stage of them all, win it in 4 matches on one pay-per-view in one night, win 4 matches and become WWF champion, even though Hogan helped Macho Man at the end. I believe Elizabeth, because Andre was at ringside with Virgil and they were watching the back, basically at ringside with Ted DiBiase. So Elizabeth went to the back and brought out Hulk Hogan because they were the mega powers at the time. And Hogan and Savage were tight at the time. So Hogan came out, basically helped Savage. Anybody that ever saw the main event in the final match of WrestleMania 4, Savage versus Ted DiBiase, everybody knows what happened and what Hogan did. But I'm going to talk about all the matches now. And I'm not going to talk about every single match on WrestleMania 4 in detail and what I thought of it, because there's too many of them. With the tournament and with the 6-man tag that Bobby the Brain Heenan was in, with the IC title match, tag team title match, there's just too many matches. It would take up too much time to talk about them all. There's probably 16 matches on the show or more. Anyways, first matchup was a 20-man over-the-top rope battle royal match. I know that this stupid book of all the pay-per-views I have is not listing the Battle Royal on WrestleMania 4, but I know there was a 20-man Battle Royal to kick off the show. You had a lot of tag teams were in it. Rougeau Brothers, Hart Foundation, I believe, the Killer Bees, Ken Patera, not Dino Bravo, but Ron Bass, George the Animal Steel was in it. He was on the outside of the ring. When the Battle Royal started, George Steele was on the outside of the ring, basically interfering, pulling guys' legs down, making them fall on their face. He pulled Jim Neidhart's leg down, and the anvil fell on his face. I believe George Steele, from the outside of the ring, might have even eliminated the anvil by pulling his arm or something, or pulling his beard, and he eliminated him that way. And then George Steele went in the ring, got himself in the Battle Royal, and it wasn't too memorable. The end saw Bad News Brown winning the 20-man Battle Royal. Bad News Brown won it. Bret Hart was pissed, and I believe he threw Bret Hart out at the end to win it. He may have cheated to win the Battle Royal. I don't remember if he cheated or not. But Bret was pissed, and he basically beat up Bad News Brown, knocked him over the top rope after the match was over. And then Bret Hart grabbed the giant 8-foot trophy that they were awarding to the winner of the Battle Royal. Bret Hart basically broke the 8-foot trophy in half, broke a whole bunch of pieces, threw it over the top rope, and it was smashed Basically, he was ruined. And I don't know why they picked Bad News Brown to win the Battle Royal. I don't have a clue. I know this was his first pay-per-view in the WWF for Bad News Brown, so I guess they wanted to get him over as a strong heel. And him and Bret, at the end of the Battle Royal, when it was over, him and Bret they had a little feud there. And this was in March, and at WrestleFest 88, Bret and Bad News Brown did wrestle and have a one-on-one match. So I guess their feud went on from there, from WrestleMania all the way to the end of July. I guess they feuded, and they had all the matches at house shows one-on-one with each other. Anyways, Bret and Bad News, they worked together before WWF in Stampede Wrestling, and so it was nice to see Bret and Bad News beat the crap out of each other at the end of the Battle Royal. That was cool to see, because they had matches in Stampede Wrestling back in the day before they were in the WWF. Now, next, first tournament match, I'm going to talk about Hacksaw Jim Duggan. Comes out, 2x4 in hand, gets a good reaction. Crowd loved him. They were doing the whole chant in the crowd when he was walking to the ringside. Jim Duggan did not have any entrance music at all. That was odd, I thought. That was pretty funny and always weird that he would walk